Hello, and welcome to Sacred Meat Social, a talk about Lewisham Unity. I'm Claire MacDonald, and I'm Lewisham Unity's Minister. And I want to start with a quotation from one of my favourite writers, Ursula Le Guin. It goes like this: "The greatest religious problem today is how to be both a mystic and a militant. In other words, how to combine the search for an expansion of inner awareness with effective social action, and how to feel one's true identity in both." Lewisham Unity is a congregation based in a small house with a big garden somewhere in South London, on Bromley Road in Catford, in fact. The meeting house itself is the front room downstairs with kitchen, and upstairs we host tenants who are former asylum seekers from North and Sub-Saharan Africa. At the end of September, it will be 4 years since I arrived as minister. It's a growing and changing community with its roots in historical Unitarianism and its wings in what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, what I'm here to discuss. The hashtag Sacred Meat Social is one way to express it, a commitment to what Ursula Le Guin described decades ago as the greatest religious problem today, combining a search for the expansion of inner awareness with effective social action, and how to feel genuine, how to have an identity in both. The term Sacred Meat Social started elsewhere as a tag for a project called Table Service, a communal meal where people bring readings, give space for reflection, and eat together. And then we adopted it as part intention, part hope, part dream. This is where we dwell as a community, in the space between our apprehension of the divine and our experience as human beings. It suggests church as a place beyond individuality or individual spirituality, and might also suggest to some of you a call to social action. To me, it suggests that in our community, we're committed to nourishing the individual in relation to what I think of as our commons, the shared world of experience and values that we take part in, our social being and doing. I came to Unitarianism late, 12 years ago in York, and what I found there was a congregation that held me and allowed me to grow, and connection to a movement supporting environmental care, social justice, and personal change, committed to ethics and values that I supported, LGBTQI plus rights, the worth and dignity of all, and peace among them, but without denying ancient wisdom traditions. So while its roots are in historic 17th century descent, Unitarianism as an international network of nationally located movements has traveled a very long way, encountering and listening to other traditions along its journey. It still listens to those other stories. When I became a Unitarian, I'd been listening to other traditions too. I grew up as a Congregationalist. I was a yoga teacher, a theatre maker, and married to a Jew. So I'd sat around the Shabbos table. I'd learned Jewish prayers. I'd listened to wisdom stories. And I'd learned that, like Islam, Judaism is much more about observance and personal and collective conduct than about personal faith. It's as much culture as belief. That changed me too. And in the end, where could I land but in Unitarianism, even when I didn't quite know what it was? And then I trained as a minister. And at Heathrow College, where I trained with Jesuits, I did a life-changing postgraduate degree, a master's degree in the three Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And then I trained at Harris Manchester College, Oxford, for my ministry education. And I began in those years to understand much more about the relationship between Unitarianism itself and the three Abrahamic faiths to which it's connected, with its roots in dissenting Christianity. Unitarianism holds to the idea that we live in a world, in groups, in communities, in families and partnerships, in which we co-create our reality for ourselves as we go along, and in which we're always open to the possibility of change. Co-creating means that nothing is determined in advance. Things may be and will be different from what we expect or what we imagine or what we prophesy. and that the power to make the future as we want to see it is in our hands. And that's a matter of faith in these complex and difficult times. And it's always been a matter of faith. Lewisham Unity itself is a connective space. It's a place where we can co-create community, eat together, sing together, learn together, be together, share, celebrate, and commemorate. It is, in other words, a religious place, because the origin of what religion means is found in the ancient word in Latin for connection. Because I hold that we co-create our world as we go along doesn't mean that I think there's no tangible evidential reality. It means that what we see, touch, and hold, and what we make happen is always informed by culture. It's always informed through our lens as human beings, through our perspective, and our knowledge is always changing. And that means too that religion can be remade in our times, that it isn't a thing, but a process, an active thread, a verb, a live wire, a dynamic spirit, a place where ethical, social, creative, and spiritual values cross. We reshape and remake it. I heard a United Reform minister say the other day that religious tolerance enables you to step away from a monopoly on truth and to understand that human truth is always about perception and values. And I agree. We find ourselves in the space between sacred and social because we don't know what's ahead. The future is always ours to co-create, but it isn't ours alone, and it isn't planned or predefined. Cooperation, caring, and compassion are intrinsic to who we are and what we do, and attending to them grows them, whoever we are, wherever we're going, and wherever we end up. At times, too, we need to remind ourselves that there will be joy on the journey and that walking the path together is an act of joy. To walk together is to nourish the human spirit, and that brings joy, that disruptive and sustaining spark of life that will, like hope, be there beyond reason and for all who come after us. So what does that mean in practice? Where do we at Lewisham Unity find ourselves in 2021 at the end of 15 months of lockdown or in and out of isolation? Well, it's challenging. I speak to you a very challenging moment in July 2021 when many communities and many community leaders are unsure of what's ahead or quite how to respond to what's ahead. We all know that we don't know what's ahead. Our life at Lewisham Unity is rich, it's growing, it's fun, it's surprising, it's creative. And it's also full of anxieties that we share. It's stressful and it's difficult. The advantages of a very liberal leaning, yet religiously focused movement are that we're independent to a great extent, and the disadvantages are the same. And those add and disadvantages seem to me right now to speak to and reflect the wider cultural context in which we find ourselves. They're questions about freedom and belonging, the relationship of culture and nature, of intellect and feeling, of expression and inspiration, the place where personal autonomy and community responsibility meet. And they're also about accountability and economics. All of this is turbulent within our society. And then there are also complex feelings around us and in us about grief and loss and loneliness and fear, injustice, the need for solidarity and support all around. People's time is stressed in multiple ways. And we don't have a general culture in which religious assembly is understood as a space of rest, nourishment, and creativity. British and especially English culture is built around secular civil institutions. And yet what I'm seeing around us is a huge spiritual need and a kind of awakening. Spirituality and religious practices are related but different. The personal spiritual is very much in the air, but the community connectedness of religious community is not so much. Sacred meets social is not so much to do with going out into the community, but growing tools of collaboration. listening, compassion, and the acceptance of our vulnerability within the wider sphere in which we live. We at Lewisham Unity are a Sunday anchored community with a weekly practice of meeting, sharing, and witnessing in one another that is in itself a transformative tool for personal change and nourishment, and that also feeds into the individual lives of congregation members. And right now, we're thinking about what that means, and I'm also thinking about where we meet, encounter, and help to shape Unitarian values and practices for the future. Being in a faith place or space means not judging success by traditional means of evaluation. How much did we deliver? How many people did we reach? But considering much more the effects of what we do on the lives we touch, imagining where we are and where we're going as a journey where our theology is the practice of revising the map itself and learning from what we do, not to become more successful, but to become more whole. So for me, and I think for us at Lewisham Unity, Unitarianism is an ethics and values-rich portal. It's a door, a way of opening up to. And that opening to is to what I call our spiritual commons, the well, the deep resources that we draw from and share with other travelers on the road, so to speak, without compromising the distinctiveness of Unitarianism. Engaging with community has, for me, to be a process of activating shared values, sharing with, not offering to. And I want now to give you a few examples of the actuality of where sacred and social meet for us at Lewisham Unity right now. And I don't want to give you the impression either, and I'm sure you don't have that, since many of you listening to this will be practicing Unitarians, that any of this is easy, or that it doesn't sit on very difficult practices of autonomy. So for us, I think one of the things that we face now, and one of the challenges before us, is not how we allow ourselves to be distinctive, autonomous, different. Each congregation in Unitarianism sets its own terms to a certain extent, but how we collaborate, how we bring the best together, how we learn from the past, how we meet in the present and prophesy and project into the future, and how we share best what it is that we do, both as ministers and as lay leaders and as members and attenders of congregations. What we have to give is very significant. It's unique, of course, but we share it with many other kinds of organizations. We share it, for instance, with the spirituality and the commonality and communitarianism of the climate change movement at the moment. We share it with moves for social and racial justice, and we definitely share it with other faith movements. What we try to do at Lewisham Unity is to understand that we are always anchored in our Sunday community. We are a Sunday community. It's one of the ways that makes us distinctive. But what happens on a Sunday is not necessarily the same as it is in other congregations. It's not necessarily the same as it was in the past. And it doesn't necessarily have an established liturgy. What's happened to us is that we know that we need to share and be grounded. We need to hear from the wisdom of other traditions, from poets and artists, from social activists, from musicians. We need to play recorded music, to find readings, to have addresses that allow us to recharge our batteries, to rest, to fill the well, and to go on into the week as better people, if you like. And we also do it in other ways. So around our anchored Sunday time, we also have been setting up other projects. And some of those actually take place and are expressed on Sundays, and some of them aren't. So over the past year, we've had several Active Hope workshops. And we're certainly not the only Unitarian community that's done that. I know that the Reverend Maria Curtis at Horsham has also taken part in Active Hope and is very committed to it. We engaged in Active Hope this year, and we intend to engage in it further through a collaboration with a non-Unitarian but very closely allied community of spiritual values in Natick, Massachusetts. So one of the things that's happened to us in the last 15 months is that although it's been a loss in some ways for us to meet on Zoom, it's also allowed us to extend beyond our geographical boundaries. And we've become connected to and collaborating with the Common Street Spiritual Center in Natick, Massachusetts. Sharing creative tools that nourish hope and nourish our future and meet our ethical values is really important to us. Active hope is a practice that was begun by the poet, translator, and activist Joanna Macy, who's now in her 90s. And I recently trained in Active Hope myself, not at Lewisham Unity, but with Active Hope London. And you can just Google Active Hope London to find them. Active Hope aligns with our values because it's about understanding that we are here in the world now as complex social, cultural, and political and spiritual people, that we have gratitude for where we are, for the world in which we live. We have grief for what is happening to us, for its desecration, for the very unsafe and unjust world that we often live in, and that we have the faith and hope that we can make a difference, that we can co-create a better world. And through Active Hope's creative tools, that we can begin to see better with new eyes and have the solidarity to go forward together. And here's the thing. Active Hope's tools and approaches share much with Unitarian values and ethics. It shares, or Active Hope's values share with us that there's a spiritual dimension to our lives, first of all. There's something that's more than the everyday. And that's in a continuous process of revelation. It's unfinished. It's always changing. That what we do together is more than what we do apart. That our relationships with one another are founded in free consent. That a better way is possible. That freedom is grounded in the connection between the individual and community. And that we absolutely support all individual paths and identities on their way to fulfillment. We're creating values, creating a theology, and creating an ethics for this time, all of us together. And it's very much part of my understanding as a Unitarian minister that we are in alignment with and we find allies around us. James Luther Adams, a great Unitarian theologian, said that we must put our trust in a creative narrative that's recreative. Each generation finding insight into the nature of human existence and spiritual values. And the way I hear that or read that is that that doesn't just mean each biological generation, it means each iteration of congregation. Congregations and people in congregations change all the time. We don't only have that awful word churn, but people have different needs. People are traveling through congregation, as are ministers. Sacred Meat Social has collaboration at its heart, and collaborative projects also help us to strengthen that ethics and theology. This year, we're taking part in a project called Breaks and Joins, and you can also find that if you Google Breaks and Joins, and if you use the ampersand to connect Breaks and Joins. It's a project that's being led by artist Sue Mayo from Goldsmiths University, and it's a redemptive project. It's about repairing things in the world, from toasters to garden tools, as part of actually understanding how to mend ourselves in the world. And part of Breaks and Joins, which has received funding both from the Necessity Foundation and the Arts Council, has been to offer to Lewisham Unity a number of different kinds of workshops. One of those offers has been around creating community conversations that allow us to know how to conduct difficult conversations together. And this began for Lewisham Unity with our desire to have conversations around racial justice. Through Breaks and Joins, we were offered the collaboration of peacemaker Raj Bari Kumar, who works for peacefulchange.org. And Raj took a number of online and community conversational events to help us to understand the tools of peacemaking and nonviolent communication. And that particularly chimed with us because one of our newer members, Ben Hoyson, is also training in nonviolent communication. It's been very transformative, and it's enabled us to generate a further discussion in the autumn around racial justice, and we hope to bring Raj back. Breaks and Joins also brought us poetry and clay workshops, where we created seeded discs of damp clay which go into our garden to create bee-friendly borders of flowers. And it's also brought to us a repair cafe with Mo Sumar, who came to Britain from Sierra Leone to Telegraph Hill near Newcross, and was very shocked that we don't mend things enough here. And so Mo has listened to stories of mending and helped people to mend their small tools as well. At Lewisham Unity, we have also declared, with Culture Declares Emergency, 2 years ago in April 2019, when there were a lot of events around Extinction Rebellion, which we also support, and in whose name every week we light a second candle now for the children and for the future. But we became part of Culture Declares really because of being committed to that idea which the composer John Luther Adams put like this, that culture leads, politics follows, and faith movements are also very much part of our rich and nourishing culture. And Culture Declares Emergency has brought artists, musicians, health workers, faith workers, architects, and all kinds of other people to bring their creative projects into interconnection. And we are now engaged in a process with actions and events that Culture Declares Emergency of working on the decolonisation of what's basically a very white climate change movement at the moment. And I bring my presence as a minister to actions and events that Culture Declares Emergency. I bring my presence and my training, not just as a Unitarian, but as somebody also trained in theology at master's level. I'm bringing it into other spaces, and it seems to me that that's part of my connective responsibility as a minister, that I don't just minister to my congregation, but that I am a minister out in community, and the desire and need for a kind of spiritual belonging, for rights that allow us to cross the difficult thresholds and to address and to accept some of the real difficulties that we have in terms of thinking about how we shape a future. It's really important for ministers to be there as well. And my own personal journey is part of that. The space where social and sacred meet allows me to engage as a person in a deeper and more grounded way with activism and service, both at Lewisham Unity and more widely. For 6 years, I was also a volunteer at our Unitarian mission in Mansfield Street at Simple Gifts, where we created community around cooking lunch and after school clubs every week. And I want to thank Anne Howell and Rob Gregson here for their deep practice of hospitality and care there as well. And I say that because that was both, it was a space in which we are the Unitarians, but we're also connecting with many other people, listening to other stories, and creating, if you like, a deeper well, a much deeper well from which we draw through that connection. I also want to mention here that at Lewisham Unity, we have been involved through the auspices of Simon Bland, whose work is with Unitarian congregations in appreciative inquiry. I was introduced to it and to its sort of subgroup, Appreciating Church, through URC, United Reformed Church Minister Fiona Thomas, who's an Appreciating Church consultant, and she was brought to Lewisham Unity by Simon Bland. And you can just Google again, Appreciating Church or Appreciating People, and find out about it there. Appreciative inquiry is about reimagining the future through drawing out what's good, what works, and what we desire to happen in and out of all and any situations, even the most broken ones that we find ourselves in. Appreciating Church accepts that our church spaces are creative, dynamic, and are also as frustrating and broken as anywhere else, but that the tools that we use to develop are the tools of stop and hope, just like active hope, and of collaboration. So all these things begin to kind of knit together in some way, not always easily, not always in ways that is kind of fine and hopeful every day. It can be really difficult. It contains lots of abrasion, lots of things that don't happen. Lots of things that break down, lots of stresses in the middle of the night, but it's also really important to go forward as we're doing, I think. And I'm now trained to be an appreciative inquiry practitioner. So these examples, and there are many, many more, of places where we encounter the difference that can feed who we are. And from here, from these places where we collaborate with people who are different from us and with people who are both different and aligned with us. So people who commit to compassion and care, who commit to hope, who commit to collaboration. Those people exist all the way across the spectrum, from the secular to the sacred, from the sacred to the social, across all faiths, and in some ways across all political organizations as well. And that sense that we can find commonality there is very important to us. It's around ethics and values. From here, we meet the world and we're changed by it, and we change it in turn. So if I have a plea in all of this, as I talk to you about sacred meets social, it's that as UK Unitarians, we're often nervous that we have something to lose if we get too deeply into the water with other people. That what keeps us whole is our distinctiveness, our dissent, our difference. But I think that what we have won't dilute. We will simply all swim together. Sacred meets social is itself a fluid connection, if you like, a pool, a well, a healing river. At least that's the theory. And in many ways, it's wonderful to think of it like that. We're trying to kind of think of something that's porous, that allows us all to be together, but doesn't actually, but doesn't diffuse us, if you like. We can all get in the same river, we can all come around the same table. It doesn't stop us being who we are, to share and to find our commons. And I think of this when I think of my own position now in July 2021. So 2 weekends ago, I swam in the wharf above Settle and above Skipton and above Ilkley in Yorkshire with a friend. And it was the first time that I had swum. Since 9 months ago, I had a very, very bad break to my wrist. I fell off rocks and I now have 2 plates in my right wrist. It's been a very demanding and difficult time. And last weekend was the first time I'd been back in the water. I wasn't sure that I actually really could swim. I swam over 4 nights and we swam at night, basically around 8 o'clock when it was just still very light, in different places, each with different encounters, with horses in the field, with boys and young people in the river, people kind of swimming there gently with friends, with horses and trees, with climbers, with a homeless sleeper called Gary on the bank. And yet it was very, very healing to be in that cool, peaty water. It was unnerving. It was deep. I found it really took me a deep breath in to get into the water. But once I was in the water, it was great. And of course, it's metaphor. It's also about the place where sacred meets social, because if there's one place it meets, it really is in the water. And more than anything, we need vibrant, powerful metaphors to live by. And that's where I want to leave you. The table, the water, the river, the garden, the places where we all come together, and that also exist in so many of the ancient wisdom stories that we draw on as well. The well itself. John O'Donoghue, a writer that I'm sure many of you know, the Catholic writer, said that the first blessing of the world is its beauty, and the second is the beauty of the invisible world, love, companionship, and friendship. And that's where sacred meets social, in the hope that rests between those blessings. And I just want to end with some words by the Scottish singer and social activist Corinne Polwart from a song of hers called Rivers Run. This wounded earth we walk upon, she will endure when we are gone. But still I pray that you may know how rivers run and rivers flow. Thank you all for your time. And thank you very much to Bob Janice Dillon for putting Congregational Connections together.